Welcome to Regional Solutions, the ESCAP podcast where we explore how countries across Asia and the Pacific are working together to tackle the region's most pressing challenges. I'm Veronika, Verner. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's already reshaping lives and livelihoods across the region. From more frequent floods and heat waves to rising sea levels, communities are facing impact test their resilience every day. At the same time, the urgency to act has never been greater. Building societies that are both climate resilient and inclusive is essential, not just to protect people from immediate risks, but also to ensure that no one is left behind in the transition to a greener future. To unpack how countries are responding and what this means for all of us, we are joined today by Julie Amoroso-Garbin, Regional Lead of the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for Asia and the Pacific, Anna McCord, Social Protection Expert and Senior Researcher at ODI, and Sayuri Okada, Social Affairs Officer at ESCAP. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? What first inspired you to work in this area?
I've been working on social protection for the last 20 years. About 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a workshop led by the Federation of the Red Cross, which was designed to help people working in social protection start thinking about climate issues. And I found it so inspiring that I became more involved in this area and realized that actually climate change was going to significantly affect the way that we needed to think about social protection. So I've spent the last 5 years really trying to look at how social protection is influenced by climate change, how it changes the needs, and also how it changes the instruments that we need to respond. I was lucky enough to work with GFAT on a project to look at what the implications were for Southeast Asia, or Asia and the Pacific particularly, which raised some of these questions. Now I'm collaborating with ESCAP on the CRISP project, really looking at these issues in more detail. So to me, it seems like the most important issue because we need to be rethinking about how we redefine social protection for this new epoch.
I studied social policy and development and have always been inspired to work in international organizations working for human rights and social policy issues. So I took what's called the Young Professional exam and was successful. My first posting was with ESCAP in Beirut, Lebanon, and then I moved to Asia Pacific. Before that, I worked also at the ILO. I've worked in social policy in different areas, gender, population development, migration for the past 20 years. I started working in the social protection area around 8 years ago and have absolutely fallen in love with the area because I feel it really brings together the issues of inequality, access to opportunities, and social policies.
I started my journey on climate change exactly 18 years ago when I joined the provincial government of Albay. It's a small town. It's a region in the Philippines, which is the mecca of all risks there is because it's in the eastern seaboard side of the country, which experiences a typhoon on an average 10 to 15 a year. It's also in a region where it has geologic hazards. We have the Mount Mayon there, which is perfect cone volcano in the Philippines and erupts on an average every 10 years. And I grew up evacuating at the young age of 5, evacuating from our house when it gets flooded, going to a higher level place, etc. So that's my vivid memory of my childhood in the province. I have a degree of public administration from the University of the Philippines in Diliman. I found my passion in doing both, responding to the impacts of climate change and doing public service through policy making. I've now had a chance to actually experience the different levels of government, coming from supporting the legislation at the provincial government of my province. I moved to the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines and then moved to the Climate Change Commission, which is a very special institution that looks at the climate policy landscape of the Philippines, and then eventually joined the UNFCCC Secretariat in 2014.
So one of the questions we ask our guests on every episode is, what solutions are you working on for the region?
So what I'm doing at the moment is working with ESCAP, trying to look at the regional context and then see how we can collaborate with countries and how countries can work together to address some of these challenges, because they're new challenges. And so there's a lot of innovation happening in the region, and it's about learning what's already happening, seeing what innovations are taking place, seeing what it means for national and regional scale social protection interventions. As I say, these are the challenges that we haven't seen before. So there's really a need for innovation. And I'm also working with other agencies on different aspects of the climate change challenge. I'm working with the FAO at the moment on looking at what happens when countries reach the limits to adaptation. So what kind of social protection responses at the point at which limits to adaptation are met. I'm also looking at how the Fund for Response to Loss and Damage could be used to support work on social protection responses. So I'm looking at a range of different ways that through policy and programming, there can be new responses and we can join the dots to really take forward this agenda in the region.
At ESCAP, we have what's called an action plan to strengthen regional cooperation to promote more comprehensive and inclusive social protection systems. Only around half of the population have access to a social protection scheme. And even when they do, benefits aren't adequate to enable them to be lifted out of poverty. So really the potential of social protection systems and schemes to build the resilience of people and to ensure that they don't have to resort to negative coping mechanisms in poverty is really left untapped. So we're working with countries from across the region to take stock of their readiness to implement more inclusive and comprehensive social protection systems and we collaborate with different UN agencies. And more recently, we noticed that there was a gap in terms of responding to climate crises. And this is in particular in the region, given the increasing intensity and frequency of climate shock. So this prompted us to explore further. The governments came together in October 2024 and also recognized this gap and the need for ESCAP to work further to promote social protection in supporting just transitions and in response to climate change policies, extreme weather events, and slow onset events. So we are now working to support governments in fostering more climate resilient and inclusive social protection systems, what is known as the CRISP initiative. This will be a 3-year multi-country program where we're working in Cambodia, Fiji, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, hoping to build capacity to strengthen the synergies between social protection and climate change.
I wouldn't say that we're doing or we're working on solutions. That would not be the correct way of placing us in the whole ecosystem of support in the region. Our role has mostly been in terms of supporting countries developing this different instrument that they committed to under the UNFCCC Convention and the Paris Agreement, promoting how do countries integrate the whole of society approach in ensuring that the different roadmaps or pathways like the social protection schemes make its way into the national adaptation plan, the nationally determined contributions.
Why is it so urgent that countries in Asia and the Pacific step up action now?
We know that Asia is a very vast region, very diverse. If you combine Asia and the Pacific, these are two opposite poles when it comes to climate landscape because it's the most vulnerable regions. It faces heat, extreme floods, and sea level rise, which threatens communities and economies. At the same time, this region contributes the largest share of global emissions and holds the greatest potential for transformation through renewable energy, sustainable urban systems, and resilient food and water systems. At the Pacific, the issue of climate change is not just now as a development issue, it's really an existential issue. As we may have heard, there are already islands that are already disappearing. It's not only a matter of livelihoods for them, it's also losing their cultural heritage, their identity, their heritage. The urgency cannot be overemphasized.
Many populations are already stressed with pressures from poverty, from demographic changes, and the vast inequality that is in the region. As we move forward, these trends can exacerbate the situation unless we put in place the policy measures to mitigate against their negative impacts. As Anna mentioned earlier, we really put in place the mechanisms to ensure that adaptability to absorb these shocks, because otherwise projections show that by mid-2050, the intensity and frequency of shocks will be so much more. At the level of social protection coverage, if we continue today's levels, countries simply wouldn't have that outreach to be able to extend protection when they need it. That would lead to not only individual risk, but also at the societal level, political, socioeconomic instability. There is a very short window of opportunity that we have now to take action to ensure that our systems are more prepared and have those policy coordination coherence in place.
The challenge is that we need to also think about the compounding effects of climate, not just the shocks. And within the sector, there's been very much to focus on shock responsive social protection. But the period that we're coming into now is one where compounding slow onset events are really going to have an impact on both human systems and ecosystems. Climate change is going to affect society in so many different ways, which will really exacerbate the existing structural poverty. So rather than looking at shock responses, looking at how there are going to be quite profound impacts on livelihoods, and even things like climate change mitigation policies, which are positive policies, looking at carbon pricing, looking at the green transition, those are also going to have a significant effect on employment, both formal and informal employment, and also on prices, which will affect the poor largely through things like increases in transportation and food prices, not necessarily the price of fuel itself directly. So there are all these different ways that the impact are going to be felt by both traditionally poor communities, but also by new parts of society which haven't traditionally been targeted for social protection. So the kind of targeted poverty responses that we've been making in the past may not be appropriate when you have whole communities affected or whole regions affected through land loss, salinization, these kind of things. We need to really be thinking about large-scale systemic responses, saying, okay, we're going to have a change in the nature and distribution of poverty throughout the region, and it will be different in South Asia, where social protection coverage is very low currently, from parts of East Asia, where it's much higher. So it's very much a period of transition. Poverty is changing, and we need to get the systems in place so that we can have large-scale responses to those challenges. We need to get them in place now so that we have the safety net in place to support people as these impacts on their livelihoods come into effect over the coming years and decades.
How can social protection systems help cushion these impacts of climate change and also build long-term resilience for communities?
The first thing is really to stress that we need to have a systems approach which enables large-scale responses and flexible responses, because we don't know exactly where we're going to have the needs. We don't know exactly which populations will be in need, but we do know generally what the processes are that are going to increase. We need to set up systems that can anticipate these kind of impacts. We're talking about linking your social protection design to climate analysis, having integrated planning so that social protection is part of your climate response strategy. If you think about the nature of social protection, it's to do with providing income security throughout various life cycle and covariate shocks. So it's to enable people to have sufficient resources to live adequately. It's about ensuring basic income security for those whose livelihoods are just profoundly disrupted by climate change. And it's something that has to be done at scale. It's really something that needs to be part of your national planning strategy, your national climate planning strategy. But it needs to be linked in with your industrial policy, with your food security policy, and very much informed by climate change analysis.
Overall, it is the importance of having robust social protection systems in place from the outset, multi-pillar social protection systems that provide not just social assistance, but also social insurance, and having a blended mix to ensure that universal coverage across the life course, people across the welfare deciles will need some income security during the disruptions caused by climate change. It's also important to highlight the importance of providing that regular and predictable cash transfers, so people know that they can rely on that support to manage and cope during these disruptions. For example, in Bangladesh, when it's provided regularly every season predictably across years, that actually helps households to accumulate savings, but also mitigation policies. China is an oft-cited example, although not intentionally a mitigation strategy. The National Protection Program, where they banned logging in the 1990s, employed just transition social protection measures by reskilling younger workers to find other occupations, and also providing early retirement options for older workers. Having access to that social insurance, old age pension mechanisms, supporting just transitions are other social protection instruments that can be used, in addition to the cash transfers that are often used to support humanitarian assistance both before and also after disasters. There are many different ways that the social protection instruments are being used, although they may not be recognized as social protection instruments because they're implemented by other ministries. When we look at across different governments, we see the diversity of ways in which social protection is being implemented to help respond to climate change events, but also to support mitigation and adaptation strategies.
In the Philippines is the 4Ps cash transfer scheme, which started as a poverty alleviation scheme because what they wanted to do is to encourage more families to actually bring their students back to school. What they're doing is cash transfer to families based on the commitment and the actual attendance of the students that goes to school. I believe that this now also become avenue to be used for contingency financing, and at the same time as a way for rapid assistance to vulnerable households in the Philippines. When when disaster or an extreme event happens. So it becomes a system that links social protection with disaster and climate risk management. That's one example. In the Pacific, social protection schemes are also being adapted to serve as a shock responsive mechanism. So, for example, in Fiji, they do have their social assistance program. They are being considered for tiered post-cyclone payments. Other countries in the Pacific are also leveraging on digital registries and payment systems to deliver rapid post-disaster support without creating parallel aid structures. If you have a robust system to understand your exposed population to this different climate shock, it helps you better devising your social protection schemes, and then also better understanding how the different interventions for climate action would also affect this demographic or population that are exposed.
That kind of alignment of social protection and national climate strategies and natural resource management strategies is really key, because the big issue we're facing already is that resources for both social protection and climate response are severely constrained. So we have to be looking at how this can be done efficiently. International development aid is decreasing at the moment. Governments in the region are going to be affected by climate shocks that are going to significantly impact on GDP growth. Resources will be constrained, so we have to really look at efficient responses, which means moving away from these sort of small-scale project-type responses to looking at national systems which can be done efficiently, and also where you can seek these kind of co-benefits so you can provide social protection and at the same time be moving towards your climate objectives.
Could you tell us a bit more about the CRIS project that ESCAP is implementing? What makes this initiative unique?
Looking at the existing climate risks, what existing social protection instruments are being employed to address these risks, and trying to map the different actions and actors that are in this field from different ministries across governments. As we've noticed, it doesn't click immediately. We'll also be developing some of our ESCAP data tools to strengthen the data evidence base on this, to identify those left furthest behind in access to climate resilience, as well as the impact of providing social protection cash transfers would have to mitigate the negative impacts of climate policies and events. In terms of the uniqueness of the program, we see that on the one hand, countries are varying levels of understanding of the interlinkages between social protection and climate change, but on the other hand, that there are many different instruments being used. A lot of the focus has been on building shock responsive social protection systems, which are absolutely necessary because we do need to strengthen the response and build people's resilience to climate shocks. This has tended to limit dialogue to actors that are primarily active in the humanitarian field and humanitarian assistance. So we want to broaden that conversation to bring in climate change actors. It's really important to build this policy coherence amongst all these ad hoc interventions that we see, and the need to support and identify clear roles and responsibilities of different actors. And all of this we are doing in response to countries articulating their need in collaboration with development partners. We then want to share these learnings at the regional level. We need to ensure that there is this domino effect across the region. Poverty has changed its niche with climate change, and we need to have flexible social protection systems in response.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. A big thank you to our guests for showing us how climate action and social protection can come together to build stronger, more inclusive societies. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and be a part of a solution for our region.